A guy walks into a dealership to trade in his 2022 truck. He owes $17,000 on it. The dealer tells him it's worth $10,000. He doesn't flinch. He just rolls that $7,000 of negative equity into his next loan, walks out with a 72-month payment plan, and thinks this is normal. 26.6% of people trading in cars right now are doing exactly this. Meanwhile, 40% of Americans who used buy now, pay later to finance a couch regret it. And 60% of the country would need to borrow money if their fridge died tomorrow. Here's what nobody tells you. These aren't 10 isolated statistics. They're 10 symptoms of the same disease, and I'm going to show you the X-ray. I've spent the last decade reading tax code and brokerage statements while running my own business. I have multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars invested, surrounded by accountants who've shown me how money actually moves versus how people think it moves. And what I've learned is this: the average person isn't bad at math. They're bad at psychology. Every single one of these stats traces back to the same brain glitch, the same misunderstanding of how incentives work, the same invisible tax that's bleeding people dry without them noticing. We're going to walk through 10 jaw-dropping money stats about the average American in 2026. And by the end, you're going to see the pattern nobody talks about. By the way, I built a free early retirement calculator because most online ones are mathematically wrong. It uses BlackRock and Vanguard logic to expose the weak points in your plan, and I only ask for your email to send the report, so I don't store any of your financial data. Link in the description. Think of your money like water pressure in a house. You've got water coming in through the main pipe. That's your income. But if you've got 10 invisible leaks scattered throughout your walls, it doesn't matter how much water pressure you have. You'll never fill the tank. Most people spend their entire lives trying to increase water pressure while ignoring that their walls are Swiss cheese. These 10 stats are the leaks. And the crazy part is that most of them are designed to be invisible. So let's start with the car situation, because it's the perfect case study in how this works. 26.6% of car trade-ins right now have negative equity. The average amount, negative $6,754. That means when you go to trade in, you owe more than the car is worth. You're underwater. The term sounds dramatic, but it's incredibly common. 32.6% of these underwater loans are between $5,000 and $10,000 in the hole. Now you might be thinking, this is just people making bad decisions. But here's where it gets interesting. This started accelerating after the pandemic when supply chains broke and car prices inflated by 30 to 40%. Dealers responded by stretching loan terms to 84 months, even 96 months. 8-year car loans. You're paying off a car longer than most people stay married. And here's the incentive structure nobody explains. The dealer doesn't care if you're underwater. In fact, they prefer it. Because when you come back in 3 years, still owing $17,000 on a car worth $10,000, they just roll that into your next loan. You're now financing your past mistake on top of your new purchase. The interest clock resets. They make money on the sale and on the financing, twice. And you think, well, I'll just keep the car longer. But here's the brain problem. Humans are terrible at feeling future pain. The discomfort of driving a 10-year-old car with 190,000 miles feels worse today than the abstract pain of payments you'll make in year 6 of a loan. So you trade in early, you roll the negative equity, and the cycle continues. It's not a math problem. It's a time preference problem. Let me give you the numbers on a real scenario. You buy a $50,000 truck in 2023 at 7% interest over 84 months. Your payment is $708. 3 years later, you've paid $25,488. You still owe $27,912. But the truck is now worth $22,000 because of depreciation. You're $5,912 underwater. You traded in anyway because you're tired of it. That loss just became invisible debt stapled to your next purchase. This is the first leak. It's not really about cars. It's about delayed consequences and institutions designed to obscure them. Now let's talk about buy now, pay later, because it's the exact same brain exploit packaged differently. The average buy now, pay later user carries $760 in outstanding balance. 40% of Americans who use it regret it. And here's the part that shocked me. The biggest users aren't broke 20-year-olds. 38% of people earning between $100,000 and $150,000 a year use buy now, pay later. There's a behavioral finance concept called pain of payment. When you hand someone cash, your brain registers loss. When you swipe a credit card, that pain is slightly dulled. But when you click pay in 4 installments, the pain is almost completely anesthetized. You're not buying a $600 chair. You're buying $150 today. Your brain doesn't compute the future payments as real until they hit. And by then, you've already moved on. The companies building these systems know this. That's why it's called buy now, pay later, not take out a small loan. The framing is everything. They've also structured it so the first payment happens weeks later, decoupling the purchase from the consequence. If you bought something and immediately felt the pain of the full cost, you'd reconsider. But spread over time and delayed, your brain barely notices. And here's the kicker. 24% of buy now, pay later users made a late payment in 2025. That means roughly 1 in 4 people using this convenient system can't even keep up with the installments. This isn't a payment innovation. It's a behavioral nudge designed to make you spend more than you intended. The leak here isn't the debt itself. It's the cognitive blind spot that makes future you feel like a different person. So now you've got a car payment that's bleeding you and some buy now, pay later furniture debt, and you're trying to save money. This is where we hit the third leak, and it's massive. $18 trillion is sitting in US commercial bank deposits right now. 18 trillion. And 82% of Americans don't have that money in a high yield savings account. They're earning maybe 0.4% interest when they could be earning 3.5%. Let's run that math. If you've got $10,000 sitting in a regular savings account at 0.4%, you earn $40 a year. In a high yield account at 3.5%, you earn $350. That's $310 you just left on the table for doing nothing. Multiply that across millions of people and billions of dollars, and you see why banks love this setup. They pay you almost nothing, then turn around and lend that money out at 7% on car loans or 22% on credit cards. The spread is their profit. Your inertia is their revenue model. And here's the psychology of it. Opening a high yield account takes maybe 8 minutes, but people don't do it because the friction feels larger than the reward. $310 a year doesn't sound life-changing, so they don't act. But here's what they miss. It's not about the $310. It's about the signal it sends to your own brain. When you optimize small things, you start seeing money differently. You stop thinking of cash as static and start thinking of it as a tool that should always be working. That shift in identity from passive to active is worth way more than $300. This is the third leak. It's not that you're losing money directly. You're losing the compounding effect of all the small optimizations that train you to think like an investor instead of a consumer. Let's escalate. 60% of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency expense without borrowing. Read that again. 6 out of 10 people would need to go into debt if their car broke down. This stat gets thrown around a lot, but nobody explains why it's so persistent. And the answer isn't just people don't earn enough. Because 25% of people making over $100,000 a year also live paycheck to paycheck. The real reason is something called lifestyle creep. You get a raise. Your income goes from $60,000 to $80,000. And instead of saving that $20,000 difference, you upgrade your apartment. You buy a nicer car. You eat out more. Your baseline expenses rise to meet your new income. You feel like you're doing better because your consumption increased, but your financial fragility stayed exactly the same. You've got more stuff, but the same zero buffer. And this is where the leak metaphor really lands. Imagine you're adding more water pressure to the pipes, your raise, but you're also drilling new holes at the same rate. The tank never fills. You're running faster on a treadmill that's speeding up with you. The system is designed this way. Advertising, social proof, financing options, they're all structured to capture your raises before you can bank them. And because the new spending feels justified, you bought a nicer place because you can afford it now, you don't see it as a leak. You see it as lifestyle. Here's a case study with real numbers. 2 people, same age, same city. Person A makes $75,000 a year and saves 10%. That's $7,500 a year going into investments. Person B makes $110,000 a year, but lifestyle creeped into spending $105,000. They save $5,000 a year. Person A is outpacing person B in wealth accumulation despite earning $35,000 less, not because of income, because of the gap between earning and spending. The stat about emergencies isn't really about emergencies. It's about the fact that most people never create a gap. And without a gap, you're always one broken transmission away from debt. Now here's where it gets weirder. The median bank account balance in America is $8,000, but that number hides everything. If you're under 35, the median is more like $3,000. If you're over 65, it's $15,000. If you make under $50,000 a year, it's $800. If you make over $150,000, it's $33,800. So when someone says the median is $8,000, your brain tries to benchmark against that, but it's almost meaningless without context. You could have $12,000 in the bank and feel great, but if you're earning $140,000 a year and you're 45, you're actually way behind the curve for your cohort. Here's the deeper issue. People confuse having money in the bank with being wealthy, but cash sitting in an account isn't wealth, it's optionality. Wealth is assets that generate value over time. Cash is the starting point, not the finish line. And yet, the entire financial system is designed to make you feel successful when your checking account has 5 figures, even if you have 0 investments, 0 equity, and 0 plan. This is leak number 5. It's not just about the amount. It's about the misunderstanding of what the number means. People optimize for a feeling of safety, a big bank balance, instead of optimizing for actual wealth creation. And that confusion keeps them stuck. Let's talk about one of the most absurd stats I've ever seen. 28% of people who roll over their money from a 401k into an IRA leave it sitting in cash. Not invested, just cash. Sitting there, doing nothing. Here's how this happens. You leave a job. You've got $40,000 in your 401k. You roll it into an IRA at Vanguard or Fidelity because someone told you that's the smart move. The money hits your IRA account and you think, great, I'm good. But rolling it over doesn't mean it's invested. It's just cash in a brokerage account. You have to manually invest it into index funds or stocks or bonds. And 28% of people never do. I've seen people realize this 5 years later. They'll say, I've been contributing to my Roth IRA for 3 years. Why is my balance the same as what I put in? And the answer is, you never click the button to actually buy the investments. The money is just sitting there in a settlement fund earning 0.1%. And here's the compounding tragedy. If you had $40,000 in cash in an IRA in 2020 and you left it there until 2026, you've got maybe $41,000. If you'd invested it in the S&P 500, you'd have around $73,000. You lost $32,000 of growth because of a checkbox you didn't click. The incentive problem here is subtle. The brokerage makes money whether you're invested or not. They're not going to call you and say, hey, you forgot to invest your rollover. In fact, some of them benefit from you leaving cash there because they can lend it out. You think you're being responsible by rolling over. You did the right thing, but you stopped one step short, and nobody told you. This is leak number 6. It's not about losing money. It's about invisible inaction, costing you decades of compound growth. Now let's zoom out. The stock market doubles roughly every 10 years. If you adjust for inflation and account for volatility, the long-term average return is about 8 to 10% annually. That means if you invest $10,000 today and leave it alone, in 10 years, it's $20,000. In 20 years, it's $40,000. In 30 years, it's $80,000. You did nothing except wait. But here's the catch. 38% of years since 1930, the S&P 500 dropped 10 to 20% intra-year. 16% of years, it dropped more than 20%. That means volatility is the norm, not the exception. And here's the brain problem. Humans are wired to avoid loss more than they're wired to seek gain. It's called loss aversion. Losing $100 feels worse than gaining $100 feels good. So what happens? The market drops 15% in a bad month. You panic, you sell. You sit in cash waiting for things to calm down. And by the time you get back in, you've missed the recovery. Research shows that if you miss just the 10 best days in the market over the last 30 years, you'd have 54% less money. Miss 20 days, 73% less. Miss 30 days, 83% less. The system doesn't reward you for being smart. It rewards you for being patient and doing nothing. But doing nothing feels psychologically wrong when you're watching your account balance drop. So people act. They sell low. They buy back high. They turn a temporary drawdown into a permanent loss. And they do this because their brain is fighting their strategy. Here's the comedic absurdity of it. The best investors are often people who forget they have accounts. There's a Fidelity study that found the top performing accounts belong to people who were dead or people who forgot they had the account because they didn't log in and panic sell during downturns. Doing nothing outperformed active management. The leak here is emotional reactivity. Every time you act on fear, you're drilling a hole in the tank. Let's shift to real estate. The median age of a first-time home buyer in 2026 is 38 years old. In 1991, it was 28. That's a 10-year delay. And it's not just about affordability, although that's a big part. The median home price has outpaced wage growth by a massive margin. According to Redfin, you now need to earn $112,131 a year to afford the median priced home. The typical household makes about $87,000. But here's the shift nobody talks about. A generation ago, not owning a home by 30 felt like failure. It was the expected milestone. Get married, buy a house, have kids. In that order. Now, people are running the numbers and realizing that renting and investing the difference might actually build more wealth than buying. Let me show you why. Say you're deciding between buying a $400,000 house or renting and investing. If you buy, you're putting $80,000 down, paying 6% interest on a $320,000 mortgage. Your monthly payment is about $1,900, but you've also got property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Let's call it $2,700 all in. If you rent for $1,500 a month and invest the difference, that's $1,200 a month or $14,400 a year. Over 10 years at 8% returns, you'd have about $219,000 invested. Meanwhile, your home might appreciate to $520,000 and you've paid down your mortgage to about $280,000. Your equity is $240,000. So the renter who invested has almost the same net worth, but way more liquidity and flexibility. And they didn't spend weekends fixing a roof. The point isn't that buying is bad. It's that buying is no longer the only path, and people are waking up to that. The leak here is the social pressure to follow a script that might not optimize for your actual financial goals. Here's the stat that gets people fired up. To be in the top 10% of Americans by net worth, you need about $1.06 million. That number has crept up from around $970,000 in 2022, adjusted for inflation. And here's what's important. Your net worth is not your income. You can make $300,000 a year and have a net worth of $100,000 if you spend $290,000. You can make $80,000 a year and have a net worth of $800,000 if you save and invest aggressively. Net worth is the scorecard. Income is just the tool. But people optimize for the wrong metric. They chase higher salaries without changing spending patterns, and they wonder why they don't feel wealthier. The answer is they're wealthier in consumption, not in assets. And here's the thing about tracking net worth. The more you track it, the more it grows. Not because tracking magically creates money, but because measurement changes behavior. When you see your net worth number go up because you invested an extra $2,000 this month, your brain gets a dopamine hit. You start optimizing for that feeling. You start seeing trade-offs differently. Should I buy this thing or should I watch my net worth number go up? The number becomes the game and the game becomes addictive. I used to check mine monthly. Now I check it maybe twice a year because I already built the habits. But in the beginning, tracking obsessively was the unlock. The leak here is flying blind. If you don't know the number, you can't optimize for it. Let's close with a stat that nobody wants to hear, but explains everything. If you're starting from zero, your savings rate matters infinitely more than your investment returns. Here's the example. Two people, both earning $100,000 a year, both trying to get to $100,000 in net worth. Person A saves 10% a year, but only earns 1% returns. Person B saves 5%, but earns 10% returns. Who hits $100,000 first? Person A gets there in 9.6 years. Person B gets there in 11.7 years. Even though person B was getting 10 times the return, person A still won because they saved twice as much. When you're starting out, The amount you save dwarfs the importance of your investment strategy, but everyone obsesses over returns. They spend hours researching which stock to buy, which crypto to bet on, which fund has the best 5-year track record. And they completely ignore the fact that if they just saved an extra 5% of their income, they'd get to their goal faster than any investment pick could ever deliver. This is the final leak, and it's the most important one. People are optimizing the wrong variable. They're trying to squeeze an extra 2% return out of their portfolio when they should be increasing their savings rate by 2%. The former is hard, requires expertise, and might not work. The latter is simple, requires discipline, and always works. Here's a mini case study. Two 35-year-olds both make $90,000 a year. Person A saves 15% and invests in a boring S&P 500 index fund. Person B saves 8% but spends hours day trading and researching individual stocks. Over 10 years, Person A contributes $135,000 and at 7% returns ends up with about $193,000. Person B contributes $72,000, and even if they beat the market and get 10% returns, they end up with about $120,000. Person A wins by $73,000 despite being boring. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. So let's come back to where we started. A guy rolling negative equity into a new car loan. 40% of people regretting their buy now, pay later couch. 60% who can't cover a $1,000 emergency. These aren't 10 separate problems. They're 10 manifestations of the same core issue. People don't understand the psychology of their own decision-making, and institutions profit from that blindness. Every system we've talked about, car loans, buy now, pay later, low-yield savings accounts, emotional stock trading, is designed to exploit a cognitive bias. They're not scams. They're just incentive structures that benefit when you act on instinct instead of strategy. So here's what you actually do. First, increase your savings rate by 2% right now. Not next month, today. Automate it so you don't have to think about it. If you're saving 8%, go to 10. If you're saving 10, go to 12. This one move will outperform any investment research you do this year. Second, move your emergency fund and any cash you're not spending in the next 6 months into a high-yield savings account. It takes 10 minutes. You're leaving free money on the table if you don't. Third, if you have any retirement accounts, log in right now and confirm the money is actually invested in something. Index funds, target date funds, anything but cash. 28% of you haven't done this, and you're bleeding compound returns every day you wait. The average person isn't failing because they're dumb. They're failing because the game is designed to be confusing, and confusion benefits the house. Once you see the leaks, you can't unsee them. And once you plug them, money stops being this abstract, stressful thing and starts being a system you control. The stats don't change, but your position within them does.